Hi everyone, and now for your marine forecast. Thursday, August 29th. Starting out with tonight's weather, we've got a weather system out there just moving east of Dutch Harbor. 991 millibars, full occluded front around it, some warm air out ahead of it that's moving up toward the central Gulf and the southeast Alaska. And then there's also a little bit of a trough out in the Gulf. And it's connected to a 1010 millibar low that's up in northeastern Alaska. And a bit of a front has already moved across into northwestern Canada. But there's still some westerlies out behind that. And then for Friday, that system moves a little bit further eastward and is weakening to 995 millibars. There might be some maritime thunderstorms with that center as it gets over warmer water and cold air aloft moves over the system. The warm air is approaching the panhandle now with a cold front extending due south. The pressure gradients are increasing across much of the Gulf. And then there's a little bit of a high pressure system in northwestern Canada, but also one in northeastern Russia as well. And so not a lot of pressure gradient up there, but as you get further north into the Arctic, then the westerlies ramp up again, and there's another series of fronts up in there. Then on Saturday, the low moves up further up into the central Gulf. It's a slow mover now, and it's filling. There might be some thunderstorms in the central and eastern Gulf waters, mostly offshore. Plenty of rain moving into southeast Alaska, and the winds are shifting to more southerly and then southwesterly. And a series of troughs are behind the front that's dissipating, and there are a couple of high pressure systems out in the Bering Sea, and some northerlies along the west coast, and still some light westerlies when you get further offshore for the North Slope. So, for our marine forecast for Friday for southeast, on the inside waters 10 to 15 knots, seas up to 3 feet, and then in the outside waters, winds are ramping up in response to that low, ranging from 15 to 25 knots, and seas up to about 7 feet. And then on Saturday, again, the winds southeasterly generally on the outside, 15 to 20 knots, but notice that the seas are up to a whole 10 feet off of Cape Suckling, and that's due to a southwest swell that's being sent by that long fetch with that weather system that's moving into the Gulf. In the meantime, on the inside waters, about 15 knots and seas 3 feet all out of the southeast. Then for south central, we've got a lot of small craft advisory winds and then some gale force down by Kennedy Entrance, 35 knots, seas up to 8 feet. In Cook Inlet, northeasterlies 20 knots, seas up to 5 feet. Prince William Sound 20 knots, seas 3 feet. And then small craft 25 knot easterlies across the central Gulf waters and seas up to about 6 feet. For Saturday, again, small craft advisories, especially in the eastern waters of South Central, but 15 knots easterlies for Prince William Sound, seas 3 feet. And then you can see some northerlies kicking in to not only Cook Inlet, but also Kennedy Entrance, 15 to 20 knots, seas up to about 6 feet when you get down further south of the Kenai Peninsula. Then for Friday's marine forecast for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island waters, lots of easterlies and northerly component of the wind on the backside of the low. We've got gale force 35 knot northeasterlies through Chillicothe Strait, seas up to 10 feet, 35 knots around Sitkinak Island, easterlies, seas 9 feet, 30 knots off of Kodiak, seas 8 feet, and then 20 to 30 knots as you get further south off the Alaska Peninsula, with a northerly component kicking in, and it seas about 6 feet with not a lot of fetch. Gale force off of Perryville seas northeasterlies 35 knots, seas 8 feet, 9 feet off of Cold Bay, but only 25 knots as that low gets further away into the Gulf. And then for Saturday, 15 knots off of Kodiak Island water, seas up to about 7 feet, and 15 to 20 knots on the Gulf side, seas up to 5 feet, very short fetch there. But then with a longer fetch up in the Bering Sea, seas up to about 5 feet, but only 15 knots of wind. And now for the Aleutian waters, winds responding to that low that's moved off into the Gulf. 30 knots further east that you are, seas up to 9 feet on the Bering Sea side and 6 feet on the Pacific side. And then the winds taper off as you get further to the west, about 15 knot westerlies and seas up to about 6 feet in the far western Aleutian, otherwise about 20 to 25 knots. And then for Saturday, the winds are really backing off because that low is further out in the Gulf now, about 20 knots south of Unalaska, seas up to about 3 feet or so with not much fetch, but 10 to 15 knots elsewhere and seas at a maximum of about 5 feet and generally have a westerly component. So for our Friday's marine forecast for the West Coast, a lot of northerly component because that low is out in the Gulf now. Winds about 15 knots and seas up to about 5 feet off of St. Matthew and for the Pribilofs, but still some 25 knot northeasterlies in Bristol Bay and seas up to 4 feet. And then as you get on into Saturday, winds about 15 to 20 knots, except for 10 knots around the Pribilofs, and seas about 4 feet or so, down to 2 feet for Bristol Bay in the westerlies and not much fetch. So for our Arctic coast now, there's those westerlies I was talking about earlier, 20 to 25 knots out of the west, seas up to 6 feet out of Kaktovik. But then down through the Bering Strait, winds from 10 to up to about 20 knots and the maximum seas about 5 feet. And then for Saturday, what we're looking at again, 20 to 25 knots along the Beaufort Sea, seas up to about 6 feet. But then as you get into the Chukchi Sea, about 15 knots and seas 4 feet. And then down through the Bering Strait, again, 15 knots and seas up to 4 feet. Well, that's it for your marine forecast, and everybody do file a float plan and be safe out there. Thank you.